Hello, congregation. Welcome once again to another bone-snapping edition of The Boner. Grab your Bible, something to write on, something to write with. You're going to want to take notes. Open up an application on your phone. Open up another web browser. Follow along with us in Scriptures, because we here at The Boneyard believe in Sola Scriptura. That is Latin, and it means Scriptures and Scriptures alone. We don't believe in the Watchtower magazine going along parallel with the Bible. We don't believe in the Book of Mormon. This is the inspired Word of God, and it alone is all we need to find salvation. So opening up to the book of John chapter 6, you know, if you've been following along with us, we're knee deep in good, rich theology as we begin John chapter 6. Let's do a little review. Let's remember that Jesus just had a discourse with the religious people in Jerusalem. He laid the smack down on the religious Pharisees. The Pharisees accused Jesus of being blasphemous because he healed on the Sabbath. But Jesus went through a Christology discourse explaining that they were blasphemous because they weren't accepting Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God. Now, as we begin in chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000. Now, there's been many scholars who explained that there could have been more than 5 because John, the evangelist, only spoke about 5,000 men. He only counted the men, so there could have been upwards to 20,000, counting the children and the women. So you're saying 5,000, that's a lot, but that's the least. Up to 20,000. You're saying, Kevin, I don't understand. 20,000, this is hard to believe. Well, 5,000 is hard to believe. Have you ever needed a miracle from God and needed to pay something or needed something from God, and it might as well have been $1 million? It didn't matter because you had no resources. You had nothing to pull from. You had nothing. It was an astronomical amount. This is where God proves through John that Jesus is the Messiah. This is the 4th miracle that Jesus does in this area. Now, as we begin in chapter 6, let's put it in context. This is hermeneutics, putting things in context. Beginning in chapter 6, verse 1. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Now, beginning in chapter 6, verse 1, John says, after this. This is a time gap, almost 6 months to a year later from the things that happened in chapter 5. And looking in chapter 6, we can see at verse 2, a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing when he was healing the sick. Now, we can see that the time gap here proves that the Bible is reliable, that it's written by men. You're saying, Kevin, this is found in 4 other Gospels, but it's not exactly alike in every Gospel. Well, that then again proves that the Gospel is reliable. Take a group of people, put them in a room, and put an object in the middle of the room. Now, ask those people to either draw, paint, or write about the object in the middle of that room. Every person would have similar stories and similar words to describe that object in the middle of that room, but they will not all be exactly alike and the same. The reason being because of different perspective. God was using the evangelist John when he was writing this part of the story that shows up in all 4 of the Gospels. He uses details that are not found in the other Gospels, and the other Gospels uses details that are not found in John. So that once again shows the reliability of the Bible. The Bible, it tells us that it exalts its truthfulness. It says that it's reliable, that we can lean upon the Bible, that we can use it to mold our lives to. That we don't use the Bible, then mold it and create it to what we want it to say. We don't cut up the Bible and make a quilt patchwork of a theology and wrap ourselves into it. And so we'll feel safe. We take the Bible as what it says. So we can read here that this just proves once again giving a time and place. Saying after these things, Jesus does this. Now we can see here in verse 2 that a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing. Now maybe Jesus only did great miracles around the Jewish holidays where the people were gathering in Jerusalem. People ask, Kevin, why do you go into the hood and why do you go places and gather people up? Because obviously John Dillinger, the great theologian bank robber, was once asked, why do you rob banks? Why do you go there and take money? And of course he looked at the reporter, rolled his eyes, and he said, well, that's where the money are. That's where the money is. Kevin, why do you go and preach to people in the neighborhoods and gather up people? Because that's where the people are. Jesus is gathering up a crowd. Notice Jesus gathers up a crowd to teach and preach to. Notice he's in the middle of the crowd, and they're following him because of what he did with the sick. Jesus was the miracle worker. He's the man that the Jewish people were saying, well, we're going to Jerusalem for the Passover. We're going to Jerusalem for the leavened bread. We're going to Jerusalem for the feast, and Jesus will be there. So there's gathering a crowd around this Jesus. This man is stretching our imagination. He claims to be God, and he does great works. So these people are gathering around Jesus, as we read in verse 2. Now Jesus went up on the mountain, we read in verse 3, and sat down with his disciples. So Jesus was going up on a mountain, and can you imagine in your imagination's eye, Jesus going up on this desolate place? We can read in Luke chapter 9 as the evangelist Luke writes about this very, very situation, that it was a desolate place. Luke chapter 9 verse 25, it says it was barren. And Jesus is on the mountain, and he looks down and he sees the people gathering, and Jesus sits down with his disciples. Looking in verse 4, now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Now this is quite possibly a year later from chapter 5, and Jesus looks in verse 5, he says, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy the bread for these people that they may eat? Why did Jesus ask Philip? What was the point of Jesus asking Philip? Now, the first time I read this, I was thinking, what's he asking Philip? Who's Philip? What's he got to do with any? There's 11 other people, 12 other people around. And he asked Philip, where we're going to get food to feed all these people? Looking at maybe just 5,000 men, 20,000 altogether. There's a whole bunch of people. And Jesus turns to Philip, says, where are we going to get food to feed these people? Now look at what Philip says. Verse 7, Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not be enough bread for each of them to get a little. Now, Philip, he was looking at it like a flesh and blood. He was just looking at the facts. He was just looking at it plainly. He was just rational. He says, 200 denarii. Now, if we break that down in today's market, that's around eight months' wages, working 40 to 50 hours a week, 8 months, and that's just enough for some people to get some crumbs. So Philip was telling Jesus, look, be rational. If we just had enough, it would just give enough for everybody to have a little bit. Now, Jesus was asking Philip, where are we going to get enough food for these people for one reason? The reason being is Philip, this is his neighborhood. He was from this area. And Philip knew all the hot dog vendors, and he knew the restaurants, and he knew the economy of that area. And Philip was just being rational. He was telling Jesus that there's not even enough money that would feed these people enough to satisfy them. And the economy couldn't even handle the want and demand for these people. Philip was just being rational. Before we read the next verse, Jesus asked Philip this question for a reason. Look at the next verse. Look at verse 7. He says, it will cost 200 denarii, and it will not buy enough for each of them to get a little. Look at verse 8. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves, 2 fish, and what are they for so many? But looking before that, Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He already knew what he was going to do in this situation. He asked Philip, where are we going to get all this? Where are we going to get enough for these people? What about you, congregation? What about in your life? What about in your lifestyle, your neighborhood? What about in your family? What about with your children? Has God ever spoke to you? What are you going to do about that kid? What are you going to do about your career? What are you going to do about your mortgage payment? What are you going to do about that need? See, God already knows what he's going to do, but he'll ask you because you're in a familiar area. He'll ask you about your spouse. He'll say, Kevin, what are you going to do about your spouse and the way she's living? God asks you, what are you going to do about your husband or your children? What are you going to do about your family members? What are you going to do about the sickness that's racking your body? What are you going to do? See, God always asks us those rhetorical questions. We think they're rhetorical, but God already knows what he's going to do. And maybe sometimes we'll answer God rational like Philip did Jesus. He says, well, I don't have any money, and if I were to go into town and get a job for 8 months and come back and use my own resources and use what I only have, if I work hard, Jesus, I'll have enough just to give everybody a little bit, but there wasn't enough time for Jesus to send Philip away for 8 months to get a job in the local town and to save up enough money to feed the 5,000 to 20,000 people that were sitting around in this desolate place. See, what about you, Boneyard? What about you, congregation? What question is God presenting before you right now? What about your little ministry? What about your little church? What are you going to do? What resources do you have that you can do anything here? You might be saying, I could do this, I could do that. It's going to take a lot of time, take a lot of effort, and I'll do this for you, Jesus. I'll do whatever it takes, Jesus. You're being rational. Notice what Andrew does. He finds a little boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And Andrew speaks to Jesus and the disciples and says, but what is this for all these people? This small sacrifice. This little boy, he's got lunch. Maybe he brought lunch. Maybe he was selling it to the crowd. But it was 5 loaves and 2 fish. But what is this? This is not even enough. But Jesus says in verse 10, have the people sit down. But notice, now there was much grass in the place. If we read in Luke chapter 9, once again, it was a desolate place, but now there's grass. It's like, I don't know. I can only speculate here that the grass may have grew and there was a place to support the environment for these people, that they can sit on lush grass, because it was a desolate place before, but now they're sitting there and they're sitting on grass almost like a couch. That is a place that they can sit and relax and recline. Now, Jesus tells the people to have them sit down. If we read in Luke chapter 9, it tells them that they put them in 50s, groups of 50s. But why groups of 50s? There's only 5 loaves and two fish. Who's going to get anything if not a crumb? But we have to listen to our Lord. When Jesus tells you to go ahead and set the table, go ahead and get ready for the banquet. You're saying, Jesus, all I got is 5 loaves and two fish. And you want me to set the table. You want me to go ahead and get ready. You want me to sweep the room for Bible study. You want me to get ready. You want me to buy a whole stack of Bibles. There's nobody coming. Jesus, you want me to go ahead and start Bible study so I'll know how to treat my wife when I get married. Jesus, you want me to set the table, set the occasion, go ahead and get ready for the banquet. That's what Jesus is telling some of us, Boneyard. See, this small sacrifice that this boy has, these 2 fish and 5 loaves, it's not enough. Maybe it's enough for us. Maybe it's enough to strengthen us for the day. But once we take this small sacrifice, these only little resources that we have, these little things that only we can provide, and we put them into the hands of the Master. Oh, when we put those things in the hands of the Master. Oh, when we put the hands in the one who sculpted the canyons of the earth, the one who holds the oceans in his hands, the one who takes the sky and pulls it across like a canvas, when we put it in the water walker's hands, when we put it into the hands of Jesus, there's enough. Oh, there's more than enough. Whatever your ministry is, however the situation is with your marriage or job, put it in the hands of Jesus. Put it in the hands of the Master. Put it in the hands of the Good Shepherd. This is what this boy's doing. Now, imagine, Boneyard. Imagine out of 5,000 men, 20,000 children and women and men all together, that there was only one person with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of events, 5,000, more than that. And out of those people, and I'm sure there was more than just 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Go to any church on a Sunday morning. If a mother's there with her child, of course she's going to have snacks for her children. Of course, in that congregation that was following Jesus, has to be more people there who had food, who had sustenance, who had drink, who had more than 2 fish and 5 loaves. I'm sure there was more people there who had those things, but they weren't willing to give it to the Master's hand. They weren't willing to give it to Jesus because they're saying, well, I have enough for me. I have enough for me. What about you? What about you, congregation? Do you have enough for you? You have enough Bible study and knowledge for your little home and your little house. But you're saying, I don't have enough knowledge to help my neighbor. I don't have enough that I can spare. We all hold on to the gospel like it's like a morsel of food. It's enough to get me to heaven. Just me and my family. Just me personally. I don't have enough to even spare my Bible knowledge to my children. I have enough for me. Why are we hoarding the gospel? We're holding on to it like it's a pack of lifesavers, and it's the last thing we got in a barren land. But Jesus says, go, prepare the banquet table, get people ready, get them ready. But it has to be a reason. What about you, congregation? What about in your ministry? Are you getting ready? Are you sweeping your sanctuary, getting ready for the influx, for the banquet? Are you getting ready to be filled for the things that come from the Master's hand? Notice the small sacrifice that the little boy gave. He says, here, Jesus, use this. Use this for the people. But Jesus takes those things and he multiplies them. As we keep reading, look in verse 11. Jesus took the loaves. He was given and he gave thanks. And he distributed them among those who were seated. Notice the way Jesus does it. He gave thanks. That's our attitude. That is our posture. That we should give thanks when Jesus gives us a responsibility. Yes, maybe we're scrubbing toilets and maybe we're mopping floors in the bathroom. We should give thanks. That could be our ministry as we're scrubbing those toilets or washing dumpsters, whatever it may be. That God saw us fit, dirty sinners who do not deserve grace but deserve hell. That he lavished his mercy upon us and gave us responsibility. He gives us children. He gives us spouses. He gives us jobs. That we should be thankful. We should give him thanks. We should give him praise and honor as his mercies are new every morning. And notice Jesus gave thanks for the small sacrifice that this little boy gave of 2 fish and 5 loaves. Maybe you're looking at what you have. Maybe it's much less than 5 loaves and 2 fish, and you're saying, people will laugh. People are going to scorn, and they're going to look at that, and they're going to snicker, and they're going to roll their eyes. And you're saying my ministry is small, or my marriage is so weak, and is falling. My health is just falling apart. But you put it into the Master's hand, put it into the Creator's hand, and notice what Jesus does in verse 11. After he gave thanks, he distributed to them those who were seated, also fish, and as much as they wanted. Notice Jesus created fish from fish. Fish that never swam. Fish that never had water through their gills, that were fully cooked as he pulled it away. The creator of all things, as we read in 1 Colossians, that Jesus created all things to himself, for himself. That he pulled the bread apart and he created bread from nothing. Bread that was fit for human consumption. That it was good because, notice, they ate until they were filled. Take your ministry. Take whatever you hold dear and put it in Jesus' hands. Note if you hold a tight grip on those things, if that little boy only kept that lunch box or whatever he had, his snack pack or whatever, he kept it for himself, it was enough to sustain him. But what about those around him? What about in your life? What about you? What about your ministry? You're saying, Kevin, you keep saying ministry. Why do you keep saying ministry? I'm not a minister, but you are. Charles Spurgeon, the prince of preachers who was around in the early 1900s, once said, every Christian is a missionary or an imposter. You're a missionary. You're a missionary, Boneyard. Congregation, you're a missionary. You're a missionary on your job in your cubicle. You're a missionary if you're swinging a hammer. You're a roofer. You're a missionary if you're a stay-at-home mommy. Lay hands on your children. Pray over them. You're a missionary. How is your ministry doing? How are you laying it in Jesus' hands? You're saying, given my ministry's so small, maybe you bake cakes for sick people. Maybe you write cards for those who are missing at church. Maybe you've never stepped foot in church and you cling to what you have. You're holding on because the world takes so much. And now this guy on TV with the cool hat is telling me to put everything I've got into Jesus' hands. Are you crazy? I'm telling you, come to Jesus. Come to Jesus. We can trust him. We can be faithful. I'm not trying to tell you to come to a certain church, to join a denomination. I'm not telling you to come to Jesus and tithe and he'll take care of your life and you'll be having rainbows shoot out your ears and Skittles shoot out your nose and you'll have a happy life and you'll sing the Smurf song all day. No, I'm not telling you that. I'm saying we can trust Jesus. As we read in Isaiah 40, verse 11, he gathers the lambs up. He gathers the lambs up into his arms, those that are crippled and they can't walk. He is gentle. As we look at Jesus, we can see his mentality, what he's like. Notice Jesus looks down off the mountain and he sees the people that are only following him because he does miracles. They only follow Jesus because he's doing good things and he's curious. What's with this dude, this carpenter who lays hands on the lame and they walk? The palsy leaves a person. The deaf can hear. The blind can see. What's with this guy? They're curious, and they only follow Jesus because he feeds them. They only follow Jesus because he heals them. Notice Jesus still had compassion on them. Maybe they were following Jesus for the wrong reason, but he still had compassion. It's his nature. He has compassion on the lost sheep. He has compassion on the people who still follow him for the wrong motives. So maybe this episode, maybe this show is a scream out to you. Why are you following Jesus? Why are you chasing after him? Are you following Jesus because you believe he's a circle maker? That he'll give you your dreams. Oh, praise Jesus. He'll give me everything I want. He'll give me chocolate-covered bunny rabbits. And he'll give me a happy life. I won't never get sick. So Jesus, I'll follow you only then. You're creating Jesus. You're asking Jesus to finance your idolatry, basically. You're asking Jesus to be a genie in a bottle that you rub and you just trust Jesus. And some of you are watching now and you got a bad taste of religion. You had a big spoonful where some preacher or some television guy told you to send him $58 and you won't never get sick. Or some preacher told you get the tithe and don't send your house payment off, but send it to him and you'll be blessed beyond measure and all your debts will be canceled. You got a bad taste of religion, where you want things instead of Jesus. See, many of us we'll be happy to go to heaven if we thought heaven was a place where we get all the food we ever wanted. All our friends are there. We're never sick. We're happy to go to heaven if we go there and we just have full pleasures in our lives. And many of us would accept heaven and we would be okay if Jesus wasn't there. We would be okay with that. We're saying, okay, I'll still go there. I'll still go to heaven. I'll go there and I'll never get sick and I'll eat all the food I want. I'll never get fat. I'll just be happy with heaven. My friends are there. Oh, I would love to go to heaven. All my favorite toys are there. My favorite pastimes and even my favorite sins are all there. But Jesus is not there. But to the true Christian, the true disciple, Jesus is what makes heaven heaven. That he's there. The lamb that was slain. The lamb who laid down his life for sinners. The lamb who lavished mercy upon his people, who snatched them from the fire, who was our substitute, who is our propitiation, who is our atonement. You're saying, Kevin, what are you talking about? All these big theological words. Imagine a raging fire, a flames burning, anger and wrath directed towards you. For the wages of sin is death. Every day that we sin, we pull one piece of the rock away from the dam that's holding back the wrath of God towards us. God is angry at sinners. It tells us in Psalms 5:11 and Psalm 7 that God is angry with the wicked every day. But Jesus, who was perfect and holy, righteous in all ways, never sinned once, never lusted, never coveted, never blasphemed God's name, never used God's name as a cuss word, never lusted in his heart for his neighbor. Jesus, perfect, holy, and good, laid down his life instead of you. Imagine these hands that pulled the fish and the bread away and fed this crowd. These hands that created the mountains and formed the oceans. This very Jesus laid his hands down on the cross and a nail went through. A nail went through and it was supposed to be your hand. Supposed to be my hand. It was supposed to be me on the cross. It was supposed to be me. This is scandalous grace. This is a scandal. I'm the guilty one. I'm the one who deserves hell. I'm the one who deserves wicked wrath. But Jesus took my place on the cross. This is why I'm so passionate about Jesus and the atonement and the substitute of his blood instead of mine. So you're saying, Kevin, I'm guilty before God. I've broken his commandments. But what if I just change right now and say, I'm never going to do those things again. I'm never going to sin again. This Jesus you're talking about, that's awesome. I'm just going to stop. I'm not sinning anymore. That's it. I'm done. Well, that's great. That's great. But imagine using that argument in a court of law in our society today. A serial killer or a person who committed manslaughter who was brought before a judge. He's standing there and says, Judge, I used to do those things. I used to be a pedophile. I used to lie. I used to do all this. I used to steal and rob banks, but I don't do those things anymore. I turned over a new leaf. See, the problem is with the sinner is they still have a record in heaven. You still have to pay for those past sins. And that judge says, well, it's good that you turn over a new leaf, but what about what you've done in the past? What about what you've done? Notice the Bible, the Apostle Paul, John will teach us about justification. Notice it's a legal term. It's a right standing before God and the law. It's a standing before God that you're a righteous, not that you're not guilty, but you're right standing with the law. Jesus justifies the sinner. The sinners like me, the sinners like you who deserve hell have a right standing through Jesus Christ. He paid our penalty of sin. He paid for those sins and he washed away all those sins. Notice, like Paul teaches in 2 Corinthians 5:17, I'm a new creature. I'm a new creature. Behold, all things have passed away. I'm a new creature with new features. I'm brand new. I'm fresh and clean. Standing before God. I'm clean. I'm brand new. Notice I have new desires. I've been born again. This is what Jesus does. This is what the gospel does. Not moralism. Not saying I won't look at porn anymore. I won't sleep around anymore, and you clean yourself up. You can't clean yourself up. And even if you were able to clean yourself up, what about the past? What about your rap sheet in heaven? As long as your arm, it's printing out satellites and linking up, and you're looking at your lifestyle and what you did in the past. Who's going to wash that away? Only Jesus. Jesus has compassion on sinners. So congregation, as you're watching right now, you're saying, Kevin, I'm too dirty. You're not too dirty to come to the cross. Come to the cross. There's room here. There's room here. I'm down here at the cross. I'm worshiping Jesus. It should have been me on that cross. Me dying for my sins, but he's my substitute. He's my propitiation. He extinguishes the wrath of God, so he's not mad at me anymore. I'm at peace with God. So standing before God on Judgment Day, where will you stand? Will you stand under judgment or you stand under mercy? So we must repent of our sins, throw those things down, and trust in Jesus. He is the only way to get to heaven.